This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Hello, welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm Rob Port. Joining me in a moment is former executive director of the North Dakota Democratic Party, Chad Oban, and we're going to talk a little bit about, politics. It's such a generic thing to say politics, but there are some really, I want to say fundamental, I think really almost structural changes happening on the Republican side of things for sure, and maybe on the Democratic side. Although here in North Dakota, it's harder to see. It's almost a retrenchment, almost a realignment. I'm not sure what to call it. The headline I wrote for this episode was Republicans can't get along, and Democrats can't win, which I think is the kind of the tail of the tape here in North Dakota. It's the two things. So, essentially what's happening is there is a huge amount of Republican infighting going on. I mean, obviously we see that nationally. The national headlines as we're streaming this is about Liz Cheney, Representative Liz Cheney, being cast out of her leadership position in the House caucus because of her criticism of Donald Trump. Here locally, we have a very strongly Trump-aligned faction of the Republican Party that has been trying to take over, and with some degree of success, taking over local party districts, the district infrastructure, the district chairmanships, and other leadership positions, and then using that position to censure sitting lawmakers and censure sitting lawmakers for not voting the right way, I guess, not voting conservatively enough or what have you. So all of that is going on. Meanwhile, can North Dakota Democrats take advantage of that situation? Are they positioned to do that? I don't know. Let's go to my guest, Chad Oban, to ask that question. Chad, it's I guess these are the interesting times that we're supposed to live in, because they sure are interesting to the point where I'm going to lose all my hair.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And by the way, it looks to me that it might already be happening. No offense. Only a bald guy can make that comment.
It's not a secret. It's not a secret. We should call these episodes Two Bald Chubby Guys Bring You the News.
Don't forget about the beard.
Bearded too. That's right. Well, the hair migrates, right? Like if it's not going to be on top of the head, maybe it can be on the bottom of the head.
Right on.
What do you see? Let's talk about Republicans first of all. What are you seeing? I mean, this is we had the Tea Party movement. And I was very active. I mean, back then I organized rallies. I was very active in the Tea Party movement. This seems a little different to me. It feels a little different. I think the Tea Party movement was in a lot of ways centered around ideas. This movement feels centered around a person.
Right. Yeah, I think what's going on in North Dakota right now on the Republican side of things is fascinating, in the sense that I don't think ideology matters. Policy doesn't matter. When you think about what's been happening over the last couple of weeks at these district reorgs, the Tribune just had a big story on Senator Erbely and Representative Brandenburg getting censured down in District 28. Senator Erbely is a true conservative, right? He didn't vote on the Luke Simons thing, obviously, but he voted with the Republican position on mask. He voted with the Republican position on transgender. He's really just a good guy who cares about his family, a true conservative. I mean, on policy stuff, I probably don't agree with him that much, but he's a really good guy, and they censured him. I mean, that's not about positions he took. That's just like a personality thing that he didn't like Jeff Magrum or whatever. And then I heard District 30 last night at their reorg. It was a complete disaster. I've seen some of the video from up in North Bismarck at District 7. And what went down up there. I mean, when you're attacking people like Robert Erbely or Kelly Armstrong or some of these people who are good people, but they're conservative. There's no question about them being conservative. I don't believe it's actually about left and right or policies or whatever. It's about personalities and other things. And it's something to see. And I try not to have too much sympathy towards people in power, but I mean, it's ridiculous how people are being treated at these meetings.
I think it gets to that idea that, you know, we can have disagreement on issues. We can have people who just Kelly Armstrong and I've known Kelly for a while, and we don't agree on everything, but yet I respect Kelly as a lawmaker. I think he's trying to act in good faith. I think he's trying, he and I disagree, for instance, on a lot of the Trump issues. He is more supportive of Donald Trump than I would like him to be. That being said, I'm not ready to go out and censure Kelly Armstrong over that stuff. I understand how he's getting there, and we're all trying to work along, but there's this, and it's not just, if it was just happening in North Dakota, I would be tempted to say that it's a product of the political dominance that Republicans have had, where there's just not a sense that there's consequences, right? Whoever's going to hit the general election ballot with the Republican, that's the Republican on the ticket, is going to win. So it doesn't really matter who that Republican is, right? I'd be tempted to say that's what's happening here in North Dakota. And maybe there's probably not just one explanation. Maybe that's a explanation. But it's hard. I mean, when it's happening at the national level, it's happening in Congress, right? I see it all connected.
Yeah, and I think one of the things beyond sort of the political give and take, the way people are treating each other is just absolutely mind-blowing. And the lack of sophistication of some of these folks that are showing up at meetings. I mean, I'm sure you saw it up in District 7. They were claiming it was they're breaking open meetings laws by not allowing people from outside of District 7 to come to a private event. Ultimately, a Republican reorganization is a private event. This isn't a government function. But, we're seeing Washington with Liz Cheney. The fact that Liz Cheney is now somebody that all my Democrat friends are retweeting and liking and whatever. I mean, Liz Cheney, a Cheney, has become sort of the conscience of the party. And you brought up Kelly. I mean, I have a great relationship with Kelly. I really like Congressman Armstrong. He and I don't agree on much, but he'll always sit down and hear our positions. I got to say, I'm a little disappointed in his vote on Representative Cheney. That I think somebody like Representative Cheney should have a spot in the Republican Party. I mean, you and I have talked about this. Where do you fit in the Republican Party if you can't? I mean,
I was just going to say,
getting kicked out.
I was just going to say, if you want to talk about people like weirdly liking a conservative all of a sudden, I'm looking at the people who are retweeting my stuff and liking my stuff, and then I'm getting emails from all of a sudden, and they're all like, "You go, Port, you go," and it's like, wait a minute, you hated me like 2 years ago. What is this? And by the way, I don't feel like I've changed. Like you asked me about any particular policy issue, and I'm probably right where I was 5 years ago, but I just am not going to be part of a movement that's centered around a person. And I'm not going to be part of a movement that's actively trying to make itself smaller. Political movements win through addition, not subtraction.
Right. Yeah, and again, going back to Congressman Armstrong, just really quick. I mean, the fact that this group of people up at District 7 are just openly hostile to him, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, if you're in a position of power or authority, we hate you, regardless of how you feel on the issues or whatever. It's very small, and it seems like it's about winning and taking over power, but for no real ends other than to be in charge of something.
It seems like a lot of conservatives, and I think this is a product maybe of the fact that Donald Trump has in a lot of ways become the he's the leader of the Republican Party. I mean, de facto. I mean, that's just a pragmatic fact. And his shtick, if you will, is sort of an insult comic routine, right? I mean, his shtick is, let's do things that make liberals upset, right? I don't think that Donald Trump really gives a rip whether we have a border wall or not. As a practical matter, deep in his heart, I don't think he cares. I think what he does care about is the fact that talking about a border wall makes liberals really, really mad. And also engenders a lot of enthusiasm from the right people. But I don't think he has I don't think he has a care in the world about it one way or the other. I think it's just something, It's a position he's taken for effect. And that attitude, I think, has come to permeate Republican politics. It's one thing to have a heated political debate about, welfare policy or tax policy or something like that. That's one thing. But to have a debate or to be making people mad just to make them mad, or to take a position just because, boy, that'll really tick off the liberals, I'm not interested in that.
Or just to win for the sake of winning. And I think it's still hilarious that Donald Trump has somehow gotten this base of people who want to take on the man. And Donald Trump, billionaire, born into, wealth, is the guy that they're following to take on the man. I think it's ludicrous. But again, seeing some of the video of these reorganizations, and I heard Klaus Lemke up in District 7 was called a Nazi. A German immigrant, a great American who's, worked his ass off for Republicans, often to my chagrin. But come on. A Nazi, a guy who immigrated over for Germany.
Yeah.
It's not a very impressive group of people.
Called that by people who haven't, as far as I know, from my understanding of who said it, have done almost nothing for Republican politics. They haven't donated money. They haven't volunteered. They haven't put up signs. They haven't done phone banks. They haven't done any of those things. Not that if you do those things now suddenly you're justified in calling him a Nazi, but it's like, you're insulting a person who has actually done those things, have committed significant amount of time and resources to supporting this movement that he cares about, and this is his reward.
Yep. And that there's a lack of respect. And I think that is on both sides, sort of when you have this insurgency. We saw it on the Dem side nationally with sort of the Bernie Sanders movement over the years, where it's that sort of thing. If you've been involved for the past decade, you're somehow bad or evil or corrupt or something like that, which is too bad, because there's many of us who've worked our asses off over the year because we want good policy, in our opinion, to help people. And again, like you said, we can have a discussion about tax policy or welfare or energy or guns or whatever. At the end of the day, I assume the person I'm having a disagreement with about policy still wants the same end goal, right? We still want the country to be as strong as possible. But just to fight and scream and not show respect for other people, it's not very North Dakotan to me, as hokey as that sounds.
Well, I guess it does sound hokey. It sounds like I don't know, but it matters. I still think decorum matters, and maybe that's Pollyannish of me to think that when politicians do or say something shameful, that they ought to feel ashamed. But we live in a world where that just doesn't happen anymore. We live in a world. Anthony Weiner is just one example of many that we could cite on the left and the right. Got caught sending pictures of his wiener to women, some of whom didn't want it, and then ended up resigning from Congress in disgrace, and then ran for mayor of New York City, because some people thought that a person who behaved that way was fitting to be mayor of one of the largest cities in the world. And then even after having to bow out of that campaign because he got caught sexting a 15-year-old, just not that long ago, I'm reading a soft focus feature about his new career as a granite countertop salesman in Brooklyn. And it's all about, remember Anthony Weiner? Wasn't he such a passionate guy? He was such a great... And it's like, this guy's a pedophile.
Right.
What are you doing?
I think Weiner's a perfect example. Just arrogance, flawed human being. But right now, Matt Gaetz. The Republicans in Washington have kicked Elizabeth Cheney out of leadership, but have done nothing to Matt Gaetz, who seems to have done some pretty terrible things. Yeah. And he's on a victory tour around the country right now after speaking of pedophilia and paying for sex and other things. Yeah. It's the arrogance of it all that's disgusting.
And we should say that that's alleged, and I think
alleged, that's right.
And I think it's fair to say that we have some problems with federal law enforcement leaking this crap, by the way, right, because it puts us all in a position where we don't know, right? There's a lot of weird stuff around that story. Now, I think Matt Gaetz is a slime ball, and I'm not inclined to defend him at all. And I think the Republican caucus absolutely should have taken some sort of action against him, whether that's like stripping committee assignments or whatever levers they have at their disposal. But somehow, Liz Cheney is the bad guy because Liz Cheney doesn't want to continue to doesn't want to stay silent when the former president of the United States is lying about an election outcome. She doesn't want to be silent about that anymore.
But it all goes back to Trump, right? I mean, Gaetz has the relationship with Trump where he would lose his mind if the Republican Congress did something to his boy Matt Gaetz. And Liz Cheney sending out press releases, calling her all kinds of terrible names. I mean, where's Dick Cheney? When's Dick Cheney going to stand up for on this whole thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's health the reason he's not. I guess I don't know, but he, yeah. I mean, it's a tough place to be. And again, I mean, it's not saying that Liz Cheney is beyond. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm kind of glad that Republicans are willing to move or maybe going to move beyond. For instance, maybe some of the foreign policy positions of the Cheney era, right? I mean, maybe we don't need to have any more military adventures overseas. I'll sign up for that. I remain an ardent free trader but maybe free trade with China isn't helping, right? I mean, maybe we can't have free trade with a communist country. Maybe that communist country is in turn going to use free trade with the United States of America as a fuel cell for oppression and to help pay to put millions of people in concentration camps. So I'm okay. I'm kind of glad some of this stuff is evolving, right? But Donald Trump can't be the spokesman for it.
They ain't kicking her out of her leadership spot because of those positions just went through, Rob.
None of those things were a problem until she was critical of Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Amazing stuff.
So how does that, I mean, I feel like that attitude has filtered to the local level, right? I think there may be local motivations, right? The Luke Simons expulsion obviously made a lot of people upset. Some people arguing that maybe there should have been what they describe as due process. I don't agree with that argument, but I think that's a valid argument to make, right? I don't think it's invalid. I don't think you're a crazy person for making that argument, but I don't understand why you want to make someone like Luke Simons the face of your political movement.
Yeah, and in this session, it was just so much different. And Dwight Kiefert, who is one of the people who was censured, Dwight Kiefert is no exact lefty, right, but he was quoted in the paper as saying that he harassed women, young women at the Capitol. Who wants to back that up? Right. Who wants to support that? That's a really, really good question.
Yeah.
And, but I think this session, things changed. There's less like serious policymakers in both chambers than there was even two years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. So you spend all your time on things like a 9-inch piece of cloth on your face. You spend time on, all kinds of different things rather than really digging deep into education, healthcare, childcare, taxation issues, all those kind of things. But people are looking for a headline. They're not looking to actually, and I shouldn't say not everybody. Obviously, there's still a hell of a lot of good legislators up there.
Yeah.
But there just seems to be more and more that are more focused on the politics, more focused on the headline, more focused on the attention than actually doing policy and getting the hell out of town after 65 or 70 days, in my opinion, rather than lingering around, getting attention.
It's a lot of that stuff is frustrating, and you're right. Although, it comes from both sides. I mean, I'm reading just this week, Governor Doug Burgum announced that we were going to end or terminate North Dakota's participation with expanded unemployment benefits from the federal government. Now, agree with it or disagree with it, I think that's a perfectly defensible. I support the move. I think it's a perfectly defensible policy position to take. We have a real problem with employers finding jobs. We have a lot of unemployed people. We have a lot of job openings. Normally that wouldn't be a problem, but right now, there's a lot of people enjoying some pretty expansive benefits, and for a lot of them, they don't have the incentive to go back to work. This is how the North Dakota Democratic-NPL responded to Governor Burgum's statement. Here's the headline. This is straight from their press release. NDGOP and Governor Burgum gut unemployment benefits and security for workers of North Dakota. And now this is newly elected Dem NPL Chair Patrick Hart. This is a quote from him, again, from the press release. As a small business owner, the greatest thing I get to do for the community is to serve them and their needs. Hard work for a fair, livable wage is what North Dakota and what built North Dakota and what continues to drive the innovation we see in our state. What is not a part of our North Dakota values is kicking people when they are down and treating them viciously instead of with unmatched kindness. Do you think that's a fair description of what Governor Burgum did?
Rob, this feels very Chris Berg, what say you sort of thing. You pulling up a press release I had nothing to do with and asking my opinion on it.
But we're talking about, like, for instance, if we're going to talk about Republicans, which I agree with you. I think Republicans wasted a tremendous amount of time on stupid things that we didn't need to waste time on, and things that are divisive and everything. And then I'm looking at this, part of what we wanted to discuss today is how did Democrats win?
Yep.
Well, how did Democrats win when that's the messaging, right? And I'm not saying that you wrote that, and I'm not blaming you for it or that you're in any way responsible for it, but that's the Democratic NPL. That's what they're saying.
Sure, and I think that there's something to be said about the policy discussion about the $300 a week, and we had a bunch of open jobs and unemployed people before the pandemic. I mean, there could be a whole conversation about that. The rhetoric in the press release, I don't know what to say about that exactly. I'm not sure I would use the rhetoric that was used there, but I think there is a conversation to be had about the policy affecting unemployment.
But that's exactly, I think, what we've both been saying. There's a way to talk about this stuff without it being, frankly, vicious. Yeah,
and I think that we're in sort of. I just read an article, and I can't even remember where it was. It might have been a blog of yours, for all I know. But that Elizabeth Warren, during her presidential campaign, she made the decision to not take big dollars, not take PAC, and that she wanted to be more moderate. But then because she was so dependent on small dollar donations, the only way to get small dollar donations is to be sort of, outlandish and crazy and liberal to get people, not crazy, that's not the right word, but to be a little bit more provocative to bring in small dollars. So that decision to not take in big dollars actually made her go further left to bring in those small dollars. So I think on both sides, there's some goal of being a little more provocative from a fundraising point of view. I have no idea if that's what the goal of the Dems were there. But, talking about the Dems, I mean, you and I talked yesterday about your column about the change in leadership at the Dem NPL.
So my column, just to set it up, my column argued that the Democratic NPL had a recent election for new state party leadership, and the candidates were Patrick Hart, who I just quoted in this press release. He obviously won, and Shelley Lenz, who ran for governor last year, and Patrick Hart won. And I took that, and this wasn't necessarily an endorsement of Shelley Lenz, so I don't really agree with on much of anything either. But I thought it was interesting that Lenz was talking about how to talk to rural North Dakotans. I didn't hear any of that out of Patrick Hart, and I'm just wondering, to me, again, from the outside looking in, it kind of looks like Democrats are just planning on doing more of the same that's led them into a historic minority in our state politics.
Yeah, and I that I think that you've been somewhat unfair to Chairman Oberson over the years, so that will come as no surprise to you. I think what people want to just gloss over is how the changing landscape of the politics in rural states like North Dakota, and how the branding of the party is often made in Washington, D.C., by people who don't understand our part of the country, and they make it much worse. So what's going on in North Dakota in terms of losing seats, that's not specific to North Dakota, and you can't blame Kylie for losing seats in Nebraska and South Dakota and all the other, Tennessee, wherever around the state. But one thing I will say about, Democrats are at a huge disadvantage in the state because, one, the voters don't like their brand. That's problematic. But you also have such a small core of people. Right? I mean, on the Republican side, you have 100 legislators, you have all these statewide elected officials, you have their staffs and all these different things. And then on the Dem side, you have the chairman and the staff of the Dem NPL, and then the 20 state legislators, right? It's like David versus Goliath in terms infrastructure because you just have so much more on the Republican side.
Would you think it's fair, and this is a theory that I've had, and I think I kind of ran this by you yesterday too. Do you think it's fair? Because one problem that the North Dakota Republicans are dealing with right now is their party is so big that it's fracturing. You have a faction that frankly is larger than the Democratic. I mean, if the Bastiat caucus won't release their membership numbers for us. And I was talking to one of them last night, and he was like, well, we don't actually have members. We just have people who show up for pizza. And he couldn't see me rolling my eyes through the phone, but I was rolling my eyes back up into my head. But, if we believe their count, I mean, they're talking about they have about 30 members between the House and the Senate. That's larger than the Democratic caucus. So that's the challenge that Republicans are facing. Is a challenge that Democrats are facing is that the moderates have left the party. And the moderates are either thinking of themselves as independents who vote for Republicans or just thinking of themselves as Republicans. And what's left is maybe that really solidly progressive or liberal base that is just not going to be very interested in advancing or saying the sort of things that are going to win over Republicans or independent voters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And I don't know that it's like the Dem-NPL's fault that this took place. I mean, again, you're seeing the old coalition, and I hate to go too far back, of progressives in North Dakota, sort of labor, farmers union, rural electric co-ops. I mean, the vast majority of those constituencies, even in labor, where I work, are more conservative now than they once were. So I think there's truth to what you're saying. I also think, and the Republicans might experience this very soon as well, it's not very appealing to go to a district reorganization meeting or a state party policy meeting and just hear a bunch of people who have no interest in winning elections. All they want to talk about is them, hearing themselves talk and doing litmus tests for everybody else around the table. Are you going to drive moderates and thoughtful people out of politics altogether? I'm concerned about that. And what does that mean? I mean, if you're a moderate Republican legislator right now who shows up at a meeting and gets censured for voting the same way for 20 years, do you run again?
Yeah.
And does that just leave a bunch more people? And you and I talked about this the last time I was on. The vast majority of districts in North Dakota, Democrats aren't winning anytime soon. And when I think about the state party, the Democratic state party, I mean, the goals of state parties is to build infrastructure, financial infrastructure, people infrastructure, all of those kind of things to win elections. I mean, ultimately, the only goal of a state party is to win elections. I do think Kylie did a pretty good job. I mean, they raised as much money as the Republicans did last cycle. But it's hard, and they have to pick their spots. They have to pick their spots in Fargo and Grand Forks to pick up legislative seats. I'm disappointed in 2020 that there weren't more Dems that won in Cass County, but I think Joe Biden also did 10 points worse than I expected him to do in Cass County. So there were
a lot of pickups. There were a lot of Republicans who were worried about legislative pickups that happened in 2016 as part of kind of the Trump wave. That they were afraid they were going to lose in 2020, and then it just didn't happen.
Right. And I think part of that, Rob, is the brand, right? I think about the places where Democrats have won legislative races. It's often where the candidate gets to meet the voters face to face, and sort of I'm Joan Heckerman rather than Democrat Joan Heckerman. And that didn't happen in 2020 in some of these districts, in Fargo in particular, because of COVID. They weren't out on the doors as much. I mean, Democrats, if you're running, it comes down to the candidates being able to break that brand and be their own person. And that's how you have to win with the brand being the way it is right now.
Isn't it? And the thing is, I get frustrated every time Democrats say that. And obviously my frustration proliferates across the headlines because as I write about it. But what frustrates me about that is the idea that like North Dakota Democrats want to be seen as distinct from national Democrats. Like you want there to be a break in that brand. And yet a lot of times when we look rhetorically at what North Dakota Democrats are actually saying, there's not a lot to draw a distinction between local Democrats and national Democrats. It looks the same. I mean, if you want there to be a distinction, then what are you doing to as not just rhetorically, but what are you doing as a practical matter of policy to draw that distinction?
So I think that there absolutely is a distinction. I don't disagree with your point about some of the rhetoric is the same, but I'm going to talk more about candidates than parties for a second. I mean, your column also pointed out that Democrats don't run good candidates who talk about the things that people care about. I was thinking about this last night, because we talked about this yesterday. That's stuck in my craw. Max Schneider ran a campaign where he talked about healthcare and education, all these things, wasn't having rhetoric that was like super angry towards Kelly Armstrong. It was a respectful campaign. He raised the resources, and he lost by 20 some odd points, right? So if you have good Republican versus good Democrat, you're going to lose by 20 points every time. And I'm not saying, and I'm not answering your question exactly about, differentiating yourself. But I think Mac also said he wasn't going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for leader. But
did he? Yeah.
I think he did. I don't quote me on that.
I mean, because I was going to make that point. I mean, somebody like Mac, if you're running for a congressional seat, one of the federal seats, the problem you have is that, they become a vote for making Nancy Pelosi Speaker of the House. And even if Mac says, well, I won't vote for Pelosi, I'll vote for another Democrat. Well, okay, but most of your colleagues are going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. And the fact that Nancy Pelosi gets to be Speaker of the House is predicated on the fact that Democrats would presumably would have to control a majority of the House. And so voting for Max Schneider is one more seat towards that goal. And that becomes, and that's not just a partisan thing. Nancy Pelosi controlling the agenda of the United States House of Representatives is going to be tough for a lot of North Dakota industry that employs a lot of North Dakotans. That is important to the well-being of a lot of North Dakotans. And I think it's tough for voters to forget that.
Yeah, I think it's hard, particularly in federal races, to separate yourself. I think it's easier down ballot, particularly legislative races, to do that. I mean, I don't want to get into Nancy Pelosi too much, but yeah. When we think about the industries in North Dakota, I always think of energy. A coal plant closed, or almost, I think it's coming back now. That was under the Trump administration. That wasn't Barack Obama who did that. And now Doug Burgum's comments today about being carbon neutral by 2030. Yeah. I saw somebody on Twitter say it's the most liberal thing a North Dakota politician of either party's ever said.
See, but I don't think that's fair, because I just got done. I hear my liberal readers, and I see Democratic people, Democratic types, who have been whining about the money that we're spending on carbon capture for a long time. And
right.
And also, I mean, part of the problem is what's made a lot of this necessary is the imbalance we've created in the energy marketplaces by, providing production subsidies, distinct from like research and development subsidies, but straight up production subsidies to sources of energy that can't be baseload. So sources of energy that are replacing baseload power on the grid that are not baseload power. It's creating a problem, and I think it's put us in this position. I support what Governor Burgum talked about. Believe it or not, Republicans don't like air pollution either. I think a lot of us just haven't necessarily bought into the idea that it's this impending calamity that certain Al Gore movies might have led us to believe. People like Al Gore, I think in a lot of ways have hurt that cause terribly by making wild predictions that have not turned out to be true.
What I think what's interesting about Governor Burgum today, I don't believe he set this goal because of climate change. He set the goal because of what he sees as the political and economic reality of carbon, right, in the country and in the world. And so when Wall Street and other people are telling us that, we've got to figure out how to be carbon neutral, it's a real opportunity for North Dakota. And sure. Just so you know, I know a lot of Democrats who've been on board with carbon capture for a long, long time in the state.
I wish we heard more from him.
What's that?
I wish we heard more from him.
Well, I was thinking about Brad Crabtree earlier today. You remember Brad Crabtree ran for PSC?
I did. I think I made fun of him because he lived in a house made out of hay bales.
He used to tell me all the time that he was too green for North Dakota and he was too pro coal for Minnesota when he worked over there because he was such a proponent of carbon capture in the state. And so, on one hand, Brad is seen as this guy who lives in a sod house that people like you make fun of for some reason. But on the other hand, he's the one that's on the cutting edge of
I make fun of
carbon
everybody.
capture.
The one thing you'll learn about me, Chad, is I have a cheerful sort of disdain for everybody. So everybody's going to get it one time or the other. I mean, and here's the thing. I think we could find common ground on a lot of issues. I don't like we could make coal better. I mean, unfortunately, the attitude, it seems like the prevailing debate is either, let's block wind turbines and not allow any of them to be built, or let's shut down all the coal plants because they're terrible. Not, hey, let's figure out how we could use this 800-year supply of coal that we still have that's not going anywhere. Let's figure out how we could use it better and cleaner, and make sure that understand that wind can have a place on our grid, but it shouldn't be overbuilt, and it shouldn't be the build out of it shouldn't be motivated by a desire to capture government subsidies, as opposed to what does our energy grid actually mean. I think if we could just get back to talking about those things, we could find a lot of common ground. Even like for instance the gun control debate, which I was just talking about with your wife, actually, as it happens, before the show. I called her, and that column's going to be coming out this afternoon about...
So you wanted to talk to the smarter Oban.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And we did not coordinate. I had to tell her initially that your husband was not the source on these rumors that I'm hearing that you may not be running again. People can read that column. Senator Oban had a lot of great comments. But, one of the things I was talking about with her was, when it comes to gun control policy, I think that, for instance... we're not going to get rid of the guns. I think that's an intractable debate. And I don't even know how much more we're going to do on gun control. It seems like a dry hole. I don't think we're getting anything out of it. So what if we promoted like gun safety, right? What if we partnered with organizations like the NRA, like some outdoors groups or some other groups that maybe just aren't coming to mind right now, and promoted gun training, right? The city of Minot, the Minot Police Department had a crime prevention grant. And they partnered with the local gun club, and they spent it on a gun class. And whatever your level of experience with guns, you could come out, you could learn about the different types of guns, how they work, how to handle them safely. Everybody got to go to, this was the fun part, this is why I went. Everybody got to go to the gun range with experts and law enforcement officers and retired military people on hand, and you got to shoot all their cool guns, right?
Well,
and everybody...
and I think Aaron and Cory Mock passed a bill that allowed for those kind of classes to take place in schools.
Yeah.
Last session.
I took a gun safety class in high school. It was part of, I think it was actually part of a hunter safety. It was like a one quarter deal, but a big part of it was, this is a rifle, this is a shotgun, this is a handgun. Here's how to hold them without shooting yourself, right? I mean, just basic good stuff.
So, Rob, I think you did a really good job of being a typical conservative, going from fossil fuels to guns, all this one stream of conscious thought there. But I'm going to go back to
it was really coherent, quick. Chad. It was entirely coherent. Nice try.
No, it was coherent, but it was just seamless. I mean, you've clearly done that before. But I think going back to the idea of, on one hand, one side just wants to shut down wind turbines, the other side says shut down all the coal plants. As I joke, when I say I'm for all of the above, I actually mean it, unlike most people. And I will say that I know a lot of Democrats in this state who understand exactly where their electricity comes from when they turn on the switch. As somebody who cares greatly about public education, I know where a lot of funding for public education comes, and it's the fossil fuels, both oil and coal. I hate it when Democrats nationally say things like, we're going to put a bunch of coal miners out of business, or the green energy economy, it's going to be super easy. We're just going to train new people to do different jobs.
So when has for instance, the chairman of the North Dakota Democratic Party ever put out a press release that said, Hillary Clinton is wrong on this, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is absolutely wrong? And actively call them out. Like, go on. There's got to be a lot of shows that would book somebody like that who's saying, listen, I'm from these places, and the way Democrats are talking about this stuff is wrong.
So, Rob, it wasn't that long ago that the DNC took a position that they weren't going to accept money from fossil fuels.
I remember
or
that.
people who work for fossil fuels. Who stood up to them?
That's fair. Yeah.
The DNC members from North Dakota who said this is a terrible position. I mean, these are working people, and so that does happen. The problem is, it's easier to focus on the press releases that are coming out in the short term. And again, I mean, part of it's the press as well. Like the last session, do I think the press should have spent more time on the efforts to take away pensions from state workers, or the lack of funding for K through 12 education, or the fact we did nothing about childcare? These issues are so damn complicated. It's way easier to work on the sort of hot button social issues, and parties work that same way. That's our attention
Well, the politicians work that way. I mean, they have,
right.
What did I write recently? I wrote that they don't have constituents anymore. They have audiences.
Right.
And it's,
I mean, you talked about it yesterday. I mean, when you define your worth on how many Facebook likes you get on some rabid thing you say, that's not a great way to live your life.
So what do you think? And I realize that you're probably going to be reticent to give Democrats advice or to be backseat driving them. But how do they? It seems like there's an opportunity here, right? Where the North Dakota Republican Party is fracturing. I think there's probably a lot of people who are turned off. I'm turned off by it, although I'm not ready to become a Democrat anytime soon. But I think there's probably an opportunity. A lot of people who are turned off by people who are showing up, calling other people Nazis and yelling and screaming and censuring, Republican lawmakers who have decades worth of quality service, whether you agree with all their votes or not, have served their communities well, and now they're getting censured because they didn't want to make abortion a felony, or they thought that Luke Simons shouldn't be in the legislature anymore. How do you, as Democrats, how do you take advantage of that? Like, how do you jump in and say, hey, there's another opportunity here?
This can't be some sort of broad Democrats versus Republicans fight, right? That doesn't work. Sorry, I had a call that came through.
We all got a nice view of the Skype logo there for a minute.
Okay, you can't just be Democrats versus Republicans, right? I mean, how did Aaron Oban beat Margaret City? It was by pointing out the fact that she was a fringy candidate and that kind of thing. How did Pam Anderson win in District 41 when she beat Betty Grandy, right? It needs to be about human beings. It needs to be about candidates who happen to be Democrats who are saying, I'm not going to do this stuff. That's how you're going to convince a Chamber of Commerce type Republican that this Democrat's okay. This Democrat isn't going to, do things to make me pay more taxes or whatever. They're going to be thoughtful. Although I think we should pay more taxes in North Dakota, but I also work for a public sector union. So,
puke.
But that,
gross.
Gross. But that's the way I think you have to do it. It can't just be, if your only data point you're providing to voters is Democrat versus Republican, and when they think of Democrats, they think of Nancy Pelosi and the scary stuff they see on social media. It's hard to win that way. But if you think about the person who is at your door, who I go to church with, I see at the grocery store, they're not a Democrat. They're my neighbor. I think that's the way you sort of break it down and have more voices out there that represent that sort of community. And I don't even want to say moderate, because most of these people are still progressive, but they talk about issues in a different way that voters can appreciate.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I as a practical matter, I mean, there's nothing easy about this. And a lot of it breaks down to the way I think voters have come to think about the issues around them. I mean, I think for a lot of voters, I think this is an unfortunate truth about voters and the sort of thing that I can say because I don't have to get elected. But voters aren't paying that close attention to actual issues anymore. I mean,
right.
not like very practical issues. Like I think one of the biggest things to come out of this legislative session was the fact that we're going to be doing more bonding. I think that's a very smart thing. And the fact that we're going to be using the legacy fund to backstop bonding on our own infrastructure is going to make the build out of that infrastructure faster. It's going to make it cheaper. I think we're going to be able to draw lines from a lot of very good things that are going to happen in the future back to that policy. The thing, though, is, boy, we can build sewage plants a lot cheaper and faster is not a sexy thing that's gonna turn people on. What turns them on is abortion and guns and these other things. And that's what the voters want. And even the news media. I mean, there's a reason why the news media focus on the hot button issues, and I don't think it's because journalists aren't interested in those other things. It's because which ones do you think readers click? Whose fault is that? Is that our fault? How do you change the expectation of voters?
Right. I think that, that goes back to my point of when the only data point a voter has is D or R. That's not anybody's fault except for that voter, right? That they're not paying attention. I mean, you bring up bonding. I mean, I like the idea of bonding when the Democrats proposed it in previous sessions, right?
Yeah.
But that's not part of the story, and you can't win an election on bonding, right? You can't go and knock on doors and talk about.
I mean,
the
you should be
able
to, but I mean, listen, we live in a country right now where let's face it, what the voters want is they want big government programs, right? They want government to do lots of different things, and obviously that's going to vary from person to person what their priorities are. But you're going to have, so they got that going on, but simultaneously they want low taxes. And the thing about it is for everybody's carping about how the politicians don't listen and they're disconnected, the politicians are delivering exactly that. You are getting big government, and you are getting low taxes, and we're also getting enormous budget deficits. The problem is, and again, nobody wants to say this because everybody's worried about getting reelected, but the voters often want stupid and contradictory things.
So, Rob, my favorite state senator, who happens to be my state senator, Senator Oban, often when she's on panels, like at the chamber or other things, will admonish her colleagues by saying, you can't promise all those things and say you're going to cut taxes. We need to be honest with voters that if we want all these nice things, they cost money. If we want great schools, they cost money. If you want great roads, they cost money. I mean, you can't just say we're going to get rid of income taxes and then expect all of our programs to be just as well funded.
I have been saying for years, I wish the government, I hate the income tax system because you pay your taxes sort of, you don't ever see the money, right? It's withheld from your paycheck. And I think it's easier for people to name how much they got back from the government as opposed to how much they actually paid in. Because let me tell you, if you got money back, you still probably paid some in, depending on your situation. I guess I do. And I mean, I wish we could just get a monthly bill in the mail, right? Where it just, like my Verizon bill, where it just says, this line item for this, line item for this, line item for this, and this is your total bill. And that way you could look and say, okay, well, if I get rid of that line item, my bill will go down. But if I want this line item added, my bill's going to go up. That's how it should work. Like there should be, if you want that government program, I'm sorry, you're going to have to pay for it. And I'm sorry, if you want that tax cut, the situations where tax cuts pay for themselves, it is possible, but it's pretty rare. For the most part, if you're going to cut taxes, you're going to have to cut spending. These are the decisions we have to make, but nobody wants to make them because that's not popular to talk to voters about.
Well, and I think what you're talking about, the income tax thing there, I think, first of all, I think that's a terrible idea to let people know exactly what's coming out of their checks for income taxes. But I think that's
why is that a terrible idea? I hope you're joking. You got to be joking.
I am joking, but okay. I think what you're laying out there is why people are so upset about property taxes compared to other taxes, because you do get that bill
that
says exactly what you're paying on property taxes, and so it's much more in your face. Then I mean, you either have to write that check or see what's coming out of your escrow account every year. That it's much easier to see. Talking about income taxes, I always get a kick when people say I got money back, as if
that was your
that
money.
They're not paying taxes. Yeah, exactly.
That was your money the whole time. You let Uncle Sam hold on to it for a little while for you, and you didn't get any interest out of it, right? Maybe Uncle Sam should have to pay us interest when they hold on to our money all year.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad deal.
You wouldn't think that'd be a bad deal? Yeah, I don't know. It's convoluted. I feel like what we're arriving here is that the problem is the voters. That sounds terrible, right? It sounds terrible when you say it because you're not supposed to say that. We're all supposed to, be the chest pumping egalitarian populism and the wisdom of the masses and everything. But what if the masses aren't that wise?
Rob, I think you cut out there a little bit, so I don't think I'm able to respond to you saying the voters aren't very smart.
Okay, yeah, fine. All right. I'll hang my head on it.
Maybe
I'll write columns
maybe I should be a politician with that answer, huh?
Maybe you should be. But I don't care. I don't have to get elected to anything, which is one of the beautiful things about my job. Well, Chad, I appreciate your time, and as always, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Any last thoughts on this whole mess, this bowl of spaghetti that we're living through right now?
So I can't wait to read your column on my wife's future political career, so I can learn what she's planning on doing. One. Secondly, and this is maybe just me taking a point of personal privilege. Anybody who steps up to run a political party at a district level, a state level, or whatever, we should be very thankful for, because as we know, they're thankless jobs, absolutely thankless jobs. So I'm going to give a shout out to Kylie Overson for kicking as much ass as she could over the last 6 years in a very difficult job and environment.
Yeah, maybe that's why Democrats don't win, is you're so busy giving everybody a damn trophy for not accomplishing much of anything. But
I'm going to send you a trophy for doing a pretty good job in this interview.
All right. Yeah, there we go. Adequate interviewer of the day. That's my trophy.
Yeah.
Chad?
Adequate might be strong.
You think so? Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Chad.
Go Dodgers.